Hi all, today I'm gonna show you another game that I played around a month ago. I was not showing a couple of the games that I played during the vacation time, but this is one of them. I think it's very instructive. It's played in the London system, so my favorite opening, with white of course. And well, you will see how it goes. So without further ado, I will present the game to you. I played d4. I was playing against a player who was a lot higher rated than me. I think around 300 elo points. That's really a lot. So I was really hoping for nothing more than a draw. So I wanted to play a safe variation of the London system, and you'll see that in a moment. Bishop f4 is the characteristic move of the London system. You get the bishop out before playing e3, because that would lock the bishop inside the pawn chain. Now it's outside. My opponent replied e6. So very simple, flexible move. He's probably preparing d5 and also this bishop. e3 as planned, d5. So this is the mainline London system. Now the common moves are knight f3, c3, knight d2, bishop d3. This is what we usually play in the London system. And so I attempted to do so. This is a very safe way to play against a high-rated opponent. You should not get obliterated early on. c5, c3. So now you have this pawn reinforced in the center. It's not very easy to break down your structure there. And queen b6 is a good move because it prevents me from getting the usual setup that I want to get, because obviously the queen is attacking the pawn on b2. Therefore I need to defend it, and I need to do so with a queen, because moving the pawn forwards is not gonna help me, because that's critically weakening this the c3 pawn, which may be subjected to some attacks with the queen, or possibly even with the bishop later on, of course. But now, well, the play would follow like bishop d6, and usually you play this move in the London system. Let's say castles, bishop d3. This is also a playable way, but a respectful one. But it creates too many weaknesses, and you don't want to have any weaknesses against high-rated opponents. So I played queen b3. This move may seem suspicious to some of you. Okay, may be logical to trade queens early on because my opponent is high rated, but actually this gives me a good position because now the rook is open, so it has much more pressure on the queen side. And also the pawn supports the c4 break, so in fact it helps me to take over the center, and therefore that trade would be beneficial to me. And that's why my opponent did not exchange queens and played knight c6 instead. Just to mention, if you don't like to trade queens early on, of course you can play queen c2, especially because black played e6 and you cannot play g3 and bishop f5 to kick your queen, which is a common idea in London. But this is slightly more passive way. The queen is not really where it wants to be on c2. The queen usually wants to enter some kingside attacks or just trade itself for its respective piece, so the queen. So it doesn't really make sense on c2. It's passive and only defending the pawn on b2. So after queen b6, queen b3, my opponent played knight c6. Now, of course, I do not take the queen because of similar reasons that he didn't take my queen. So now we're just staring at each other, let's say. Knight b2. So just normal London system development. Bishop e7, getting ready to castle, and bishop e2. Normally in the London system you would like to put the bishop on d3 so that it observes the king side. But there is some complications to this move because of c4, which pretty much forces you to exchange here and go bishop e2 anyways. You can also go bishop c2, but I mean, this is not a good position. Black has tremendous pressure on the a file, and can also roll the pawn to b4 and simply get a good play. That's why bishop e2, so that now if c4, then I can just go to c2, and now simply the queen is playing some role, supporting the e4 break, so that this c4 pawn is weak. Castles, castles, very logical. And queen d8, a move which I didn't really understand. Maybe he just didn't want to have the queens traded in such a position where I have a very safe pawn structure with practically no weaknesses. And he's a high-rated player, he wants to win, so maybe that's some logic to it. I played h3, which is a common idea in the London system. You want to have not only do you have the flight square for the king in the potential endgame, but let's say if I played, I don't know, whatever, pawn to a4, then there is a possible move knight h5. And now these two squares are controlled with a knight, and this square is controlled by the bishop, and my dark square bishop will be dead. He will trade the knight for the bishop, which is slightly better for black. And the move h3 simply prevents all of that. He played bishop d6, but if he played knight h5, I just go back to h2, and well, I'm pretty safe. But here he played bishop d6, exploiting the fact that I cannot play the normal move, because normally you would like to return to g3, and then after the exchange, of course, the rook would be pretty strong on h1. This is a common idea in London, but of course, since I'm castled and played h3, then this is not possible. But I don't like to exchange the bishops, because if I do so, his queen comes into the action, and, well, I'm just helping him develop. So just played knight e5. Okay, he cannot trade knights. If he wants to double my pawns, then he has to take with a bishop first. But then I take d takes, knight d7. And this is a playable line for black, but it's not particularly attractive. I would say that after knight f3 and bishop d3, queen c2, or first queen c2, I have a lot of pressure on the king's side, also knight to g5. So I wouldn't say that this pawn is anything weak. He's not going to win it anytime soon. And trying to do that with queen c7, lining the queen with a bishop, is in general not a good idea. So he didn't take, he played queen c7 first, as he has the bishop on this square. So now, of course, there's a pressure on the knight. Let's just count: 2 defenders, 3 attackers. So I get it defended, knight f3. So now 3 defenders, and knight e4. I was rather expecting the move here, which I would be happy with, because after knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, pawn takes, queen takes, then I would win the b7 pawn. So he cannot simply put pressure on my center like that. So he played knight e4. On one hand, maybe trying knight d2 after this knight's removed, or simply putting the knight in an active spot. Also maybe preparing f6 to kick this knight away. Queen c2. It's important because my queen is useless here. He's not gonna go anywhere with this bishop. And, well, basically, I'm not putting pressure on the center. And with the move queen c2, I also enable the move bishop d3, because in previous position, if I played bishop d3, then I would be hit with c4 and a fork. So queen c2, pretty logical, preparing bishop d3. f6, kicking the knight away, knight takes knight. Now you may wonder that maybe bishop f4 is a good move, because of course I would be forced into going for that line where my pawn is on f4 and it's doubled, but it's not a bad situation at all. I can even give up this pawn and play knight d2. If he takes the pawn, then after knight takes c4, queen takes c4, queen takes c4, pawn takes c4, and d takes c5, I'm winning the pawn back, and Well, I wouldn't say that this pawn structure is necessarily good. I mean, mine is not great either, but this position is fine for white, and I would be happy to have this position against this opponent. And he knew that, so he simply took with a pawn, allowing his bishop to develop, also supporting the center. I took the bishop and played bishop d3, putting pressure on the knight on e4. Well, this knight has nowhere to go, so it has to be defended with f5. Now the knight is protected with 2 pawns. I took it anyway because this bishop is pretty much useless and will not be useful in time soon. The only, let's say, useful thing it does is it prevents this bishop from entering a6, but nothing except that, and this bishop may get active, this way as well, so there is absolutely no point in holding the bishop in here. So I simply took the knight. I knew he would take with the f-pawn, and now knight e5. It appears that black is doing great, that, well, he has a massive center that cannot really be undermined, even though I will do that, but don't want to spoil it. Now I think he made a first major mistake of the game. He played rook d8, which I didn't understand. What he should have played is, of course, bishop a6, because bishop a6 attacks the rook, and it forces the rook to move away. Now, why is this so important? Well, it's critically important because after rook d8, what I played was f3. And now, after this file opens up, I will have the rook controlling it. So you'll see that in a moment. After rook d8, f3, and now he played bishop a6, but it's too late because I have rook f2, and the rook is still supporting the pawn. If he played bishop a6 first, and my rook was here, then he could take that, and I would need to retreat with the knight, which is not really what I want. The knight is very well placed on e5, it cannot be kicked away from there. He takes f3, rook takes f3. Just to point out, this knight on e5 is really going to be an argument in this game. Which piece is better? You see that this imbalance, knight against bishop, what is going to be better? Well, apparently now they seem both quite good. The bishop controls f1 square, so it does not allow the second rook to get involved. But the knight, on the other hand, is putting pressure on the pawns in the center and controlling f7 square. So, also, just to mention, at the moment, the knight to f7 is a threat. From there, we would have a fork. My opponent just retreated back to f8. He took, and now, okay, he's getting control of the f-file, but I have certain compensation for that with the move queen a4. So you see now there's a double attack on c6, and there's, of course, the bishop is hit. And it's not easy for black to decide what to do. He cannot move the bishop away, that's for sure. He's losing the a7 pawn. So the only way to do something about this is for my opponent to capture on d4. Now, of course, if I take the bishop, he takes my knight. And if I stay greedy, or maybe if I just recapture the pawn, the position is dead equal after queen e3 and say king h1. This is very good drawing chances for black, very quickly, and absolutely no problems at all for black. But since I saw that I may have the advantage here, I simply took the pawn now so that the queen cannot enter to my king. So now the bishop is hit, and still it can't move. If it moves to b7, defending the c6 pawn, then I'm gonna take on a7. And if it doesn't move, if it's, I don't know, if it's moved anywhere, then a7 is dropping, or c6 is dropping, one of the two. That's why the only move that black has in this position is c5. Now, This is defended. This is no longer a threat because the pawn moved. So it seems that black solved all of his problems, but he actually didn't. And there is a very funny move, queen d7. Seems a bit awkward because it's offering the exchange of queens, and when you're better, you really don't want to exchange queens, but not in this case. You're tactically ready for that. If queen takes queen, knight takes queen, forking the rook and the pawn, and after the rook moves, the engine move is rook to f5. You simply take this pawn, attacking the bishop and the pawn. Bishop comes to c8. The knight controls the bishop nicely, and you would simply play rook d1, putting more pressure, or if you wanted, you could play rook f1, trying to exchange rooks. After king f7, g4, rook f6, rook takes f6, g takes f6, king f2. This endgame you definitely can win because you have the very easy possibility of creating a passed pawn, either this way or this way. You're ahead a pawn, this bishop is well controlled. So this endgame, well, offers you at least a draw. So he didn't exchange, he went queen b6, counter-attacking on these squares, and now queen e7. This is important. Why is this important? Well, first of all, you are threatening knight d7 to fork the queen and the rook. Well, that's sort of obvious. But what's more? Well, if queen takes b2, saying, okay, now I win the rook. Well, not really, because after queen here check, you got this pretty nice mate after knight f7. Well, okay, you can take and allow mate. Very fair. But there's also another variation after knight f7 check, king g8, knight h6 check, king h8, queen g8 check, rook takes, and knight f7 mate. I really wanted my opponent to play this way, but no, unfortunately he didn't. He saw that. So after queen b6, queen e7, he can take on b2. So he played rook c8, which is a mistake. During the game I thought, well, bishop c8 can save the day for black, because it attacks the e6 pawn, it defends the e6 pawn and the d7 square, so both threats are neutralized. Okay, maybe you're giving up this pawn, but now you can safely take on b2 because the pawn is protected, so there are no more threats. But there's another thing important in this position, that this bishop was defending the f1 square, so my rook couldn't enter it, and now it does. And it's a great problem because, well, this attack is just overwhelming, and black cannot really hope to have a rook remaining on f8. He has to trade in this position. And after I can take back. Of course, this didn't happen in the game, but what could potentially happen? Well, of course, now there are a lot of threats to win this bishop, to checkmate the black king, and simply the best he can do, according to the engine, is to play h6, after queen e8, king h7 to give up this bishop. And okay, he has queen b2, but it should be noted that white is simply ahead a knight. So my opponent played rook c8, which is a mistake. I played knight d7, which is sort of maybe not so obvious. Okay, attacking the queen, and after queen takes b2, what's the threat? Well, of course, the threat is queen e6, attacking the king and the bishop. But my opponent probably missed the fact that after king h1, well, he thought, okay, my bishop is hanging, but your rook is hanging. But now the move that pretty much finishes the game, rook e1, and there is no way to save the bishop. If you do it, if you save the bishop, then unfortunately you get checkmated. Well, I should say fortunately, because I'm playing with the white pieces, but whatever. My opponent simply, well, after playing king h8, I played rook e1, and, well, he played h6 desperately, but I just took on a6. And in this position, my opponent resigned. Of course, you may think this is an early resignation because, well, there's absolutely still a lot of play. You can win another pawn, but not really, because you're losing the rook. that's first of all. So you need to save the rook first. So if you want to put a pressure on the knight and then maybe try to win the pawn, well, this still doesn't work because of queen g6. Of course, you can't take because you lose the rook, or even rook e8.
Checkmate.
Yeah, exactly, checkmate. So there is simply no hope for black, and that's why my opponent resigned. I think there are a couple of positional mistakes made by my opponent. First one, of course, some inaccurate move was queen d8. Well, you don't develop the queen to b6 to just retreat back to b8 to d8 without achieving anything. And afterwards, we played very, very well, up until this point where he played rook d8 instead of bishop a6. That allowed me to fight for the advantage, neutralized his center, and then of course this move queen a4, which started all the trouble for him. So yeah, I guess this was a very good game by me. So if you enjoyed it, you can comment or like it or whatever you want. And see you in the next one. Bye.